Good morning and welcome back to those of you who have joined us for our second session of our Housing First Wales Conference 2022. I'm delighted in this session, which is focused on Housing First for Women, to welcome Basis Yorkshire to our Housing First Conference. They're an organisation that works to end stigma, create safety and promote empowerment for sex workers and women and young people experiencing sexual abuse and exploitation. Chief Executive Moya Woolven and Nicky Pickup, who is a Housing First support worker, will be talking about their Housing First Women project, one of the only sex worker specific projects in the country, and the importance of taking a gender-informed, trauma-informed, harm reduction and rights-based approach. Welcome Moya and Nicky, and please feel free to talk us through your presentation. Thank you.
Well, firstly, I'd like to just say thank you to Kate for inviting us to speak today at this wonderful conference that you have. I'm really pleased to be here alongside Nicky, who obviously is doing the frontline work and is, I don't know why. Sorry, I'm having a slide issue here. Already, who has the experience of working directly with the women, and we'll be calling upon her to give her views and thoughts as we go through the presentation. So firstly, just a little bit about Basis Yorkshire and who we are. We were established in 1989, so more than 30 years experience now of working in Leeds with sex workers, providing support to women both on street, indoors and in any other venues that they work from. We've extended this to also working with young people who experience exploitation and abuse, having seen in the 80s and 90s quite a lot of young women in particular who were working on street, who were at that point referred to as child prostitutes. We recognised that that was absolutely not the case and that they were experiencing exploitation, and that sent us on a path to be able to work towards supporting those young people, which we still continue to do. We also support adult women who experience sexual exploitation. We recognise that some of the women who work on street are being exploited into sex work, not all, but some, and some women also who work indoors. It's not the experience of every sex worker. There are others who have been who are experiencing sexual exploitation outside the remit of sex work, but we feel it's really important that those women can access non-judgmental support that we offer, and we deliver training so that we can teach other professionals about our ways of working, the way that we work with sex workers and others, and around the issues around sex work. So our sex work project, we offer holistic support and advocacy, and we link that with other agencies wherever possible. We recognise that we can't deliver all services to all women, so we do very much take a partnership approach. We're also very keen on working around systems change, particularly around housing and homelessness and health, which have enormous impacts on the women we support, recognising that stigma is still a huge issue for the majority of people that we support. So we work alongside other agencies and try and help the systems fit the people, rather than trying to squeeze people into systems that don't work and don't support their needs or give them the services that they should be entitled to. So women who are sex working are often disproportionately impacted by homelessness. And despite this, women are much less likely to encounter traditional homelessness services, They're not seen on street counts. They're often referred to as hidden homeless, and it can make it more difficult for them to access emergency accommodation. They're often more vulnerable than people who are on streets because of that invisibility and staying in very unsafe circumstances with people who wish to do them harm and often do so. So the barriers to housing, there are many. There's stigma, which I've already talked about. There's digital exclusion, coercive control, not having ID, having pets. That's something that we often find that women will have pets that they, as we all are, very fond of. It's often the only thing in their lives that keeps them going, and the thought of being separated from that pet is a huge barrier, and we often invest a lot of time and energy trying to find foster placements for animals, and I think the majority of staff at one time or other has fostered a pet for a period in order to, or sometimes rehomed if that's what needs to happen, an animal to enable a woman to access the accommodation that she needs. Often leaving prison without a worker and leaving on a Friday can mean that there's great difficulties over that time to access any statutory services around housing, and it makes it almost impossible for the woman to find somewhere safe to stay, and will often end up staying with punters or in really unsafe environments. So language alone, it's the inappropriate use of language can create stigma, and that stigma creates a little hole to put you in, to allow anyone else, including predators, to come along and take advantage, to put further labels on you, and both are as damaging. And that's a direct quote from a woman that we've been supporting, and that's her experience of stigma in the work that she has done. And I think it says it all, really. I don't think there's much more for me to say on that one. I'll move on to the next slide around the background of the women that we have supported during the lifetime of our Housing First project. We've been working around Housing First for the past 6 years, maybe slightly longer than that. Nicky has been in post in this role within the organisation for 4.5 years now, and you can see on this slide the complexity of the issues that the women who have been housed through Housing First have experienced and continue to experience. I think it's particularly of note that prior to Housing First, 6 out of the 7 women that we had supported had experienced being in prison. And since they'd been housed, only 1 of those women has been imprisoned, and that was only for a 24-hour period. So I think that does show the difference that Housing First can make if you adhere to the principles, and we've worked really hard to try and adhere to the principles. We will go into a little bit more detail in a while about where we haven't quite managed to do that, and some of the issues we've faced, and I'm sure everyone else has who's using this model. But it's been a huge success for the majority of women that we've supported through this. And we've even had 3 out of 7 women who've had children either return to live with them or are now in regular contact, whereas prior to that, they'd had no contact for many, many years.
Yeah, I think just on that fact alone with the children, it obviously impacts on the women greatly. All of them have either lost the children, a couple have gone to family members to look after. So I think because of the chaotic lifestyle, it's been really difficult to have any contact, which impacts greatly on their mental health and obviously the children's. 3 of those clients, one in particular, she's probably the longest client that we've worked for, which is 4.5 years due to the complexities. She has suffered with childhood trauma herself and abuse, and she just used to say that her dream would be to see her children again. That's happened in the last 2 years, and the difference it's made to her lifestyle has just been incredible. She's now stable. She sees the children every weekend. She's going on a family holiday for the first time. So I think with that, everything else seems to have fallen into place as well. We don't get many outcomes like that. But I think with Housing First, because of the intensive support, that's able to happen. So yeah, and again, like Moya said, with the prison, that's made a huge difference. Obviously, saving costs to statutory services as well. Yeah, the lady in question that was just in for a 24-hour period, that was actually a mistake as well. So, so yes, nearly 7 out of 7 on that one. But I think, as you can see from that table, and I'm sure most of the clients that everyone's working with, it's very similar. Childhood trauma, mental health plays a massive part. Obviously, we struggle along with the rest of the country, I think, with accessing mental health services when needed. I think the other big one there is obviously the addiction and the physical health. The majority of the women have got physical health issues. A couple in particular quite severe. One of them's actually life-threatening at the moment. So yeah, that with the intensive support that can be provided on Housing First, the engagement with GP, hospital, other health services increases dramatically.
Absolutely, and I think it's probably a good time to mention that actually a lot of the women who have had problematic drug use and have moved into Housing First have been able to start that recovery journey. However, since the majority of women who have been using heroin and crack and prescription drugs to mask the trauma that they've experienced, once that is removed, if it doesn't go alongside that really important therapeutic care and mental health support, that can also have quite a serious impact on women at that point, needing, so that they need even more intensive support at that point. Just move on to the next. So this is a really important principle, I think, around Housing First, that split between housing support and tenancy management. Over many years, I've worked in various roles managing housing support programs where the tenancy and housing support, the tenancy management and housing support have been combined. And we found that over years that really was incredibly difficult, because on the one hand, the person who was having to enforce the tenancy management rules and regulations was the same person who was trying to offer support, and that balance was always really difficult. So we found this really important, and we're very fortunate that we have a really good partner in Leeds, an organisation called Turning Lives Around that we work with really closely, and the level of intensive tenancy management support that they've been able to offer has really it's been a game changer as far as being able to offer the right support for women.
Yeah, I think on that, for example, if there is any risk to the women or domestic violence, we can arrange a lock change within 30 minutes, which is amazing, and ensures that the woman feels safe. I think going through other routes, if, say, for example, a woman's in a council tenancy, we have to go through the normal repairs, and that can take up to 24 hours, which obviously then is putting that person at risk. So that's worked really, really well. And I think the other thing to point out on that, one client in particular at the moment, her partner does not like Sue from TLA, who I work with, because he's sort of like blaming her for various things going wrong in the relationship and a child being removed. So, as Moya said, if it's just one person managing the housing support and the support itself, that would totally fail. So at the moment, we're still able to work really closely with her, as well as passing on still any repairs to Turning Lives Around. So that is the only case out of the 7 women that we're working with at the moment. But yeah, just to point out that if that does happen, the woman's still getting full support.
Absolutely. So what makes it work? I think definitely because it's person-centred, it's non-judgmental. The trauma and gender-informed approach that we take is really, really key to its success. And the low or no barrier to access is really important. The fact that it's unconditional, and that includes leaving sex work. So we have had over the years many, and will no doubt continue to have many conversations and discussions with landlords and potential landlords around this. Many people think that sex work is illegal. It actually isn't. There are laws around it, around soliciting and so on, that are illegal, but sex work in and of itself is not illegal. It becomes an issue if more than one woman is sex working out of a property, because then that is classed as a brothel, even though in the woman's view, and it's a view that we absolutely share, that's a safer way of working than working alone. However, they're the laws that we're dealing with at the moment. So as long as she's sex working in a safe way, it's not creating antisocial behaviour, it's not creating issues for the neighbours, then there's absolutely no reason why a woman couldn't continue to sex work from her property should she wish to do so. Our experience, however, has been that the majority of women who have got a property through Housing First have made the decision that they don't wish to continue to sex work, and may occasionally sex work, but for the majority, they have stopped altogether. I think that's right, isn't it, Nicky?
It is, yeah. Again, I think that's the stability of having a home And then obviously managing to get on a methadone script and to keep that script. We're really looking Leeds as well on that point, that we have forward leads that we work really closely with. And within the 3 hubs, they have key workers just for sex workers. So if a client does fall off script for any reason, their worker is totally understanding of the issues, and we can normally get the scripts restarted quite quickly instead of waiting for a period of 3 weeks. So that makes a massive difference. And I think that then leads on to not needing sex work or not sex work as much. So yeah, I think the main point in that slide for me as well is that we never give up. We have never had anyone that has wanted to end the support, which is quite surprising, really, because due to the chaotic lifestyles, a lot of the women dip in and out of support over the years, but engagement wise is really, really good. And the fact that the know from the start will never give up does make a huge difference, even along the ups and downs along the way. You know, a client might just not be in touch for a couple of weeks, but then obviously knows that they can just contact us at any point, and that will always be there.
Absolutely. And I think it does make a difference that we worked really hard to give them properties that were of a decent standard and that had white goods and furniture and pots and pans and everything you could possibly think of that you would need to set up a home. We were really lucky through the funding that we received from and continue to receive from Tudor Trust to be able to do that. So often when women do get offered council tenancies, they either have the absolute basics or not even those. But with this programme, we have been able to, I think, show women what they're worth and give them that level of respect that they've got nice things around them. And that, I think, gives them that feeling that they can go on and develop and change their lives in any direction that they so choose.
Yeah, that does make a really big difference. I mean, we even ask the clients before we move them in what colours they like for things like cushions, bedding. So literally when they walk in the house, there's absolutely everything that they need. And we also buy them shopping to last them until they get paid for that first period. But it does make such a massive difference because it actually looks like a home, whereas it's not just an empty shell that they can't afford to decorate or even put carpets down. So, yeah.
So as far as outcomes go, I think we've talked about some of these already, but they bear repeating. So definitely increased engagement with other agencies and improved agency coordination because they've got stable housing and they can keep appointments better. They can be taken to appointments if necessary by Nicky or her colleagues, and that level of support really does make a difference. We've seen improvements in health and mental health as well because of that engagement and because we've been able to support women to access the services that they need. It also has cost savings to the council and authorities because they're not going through that revolving door of getting a property that they're not able to maintain because they haven't got that level of support around them and they haven't got as Nicky says, even able to put carpet down, let alone anything else, and often then the tenancies will fail. I mean, we have had some issues with women where they've not been able to keep that stability going outside of Housing First. But for the women who have been on the programme, and it's unfortunate, I mean, we could fill our Housing First programme 2, 3, 4, 5 times over, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the funding to do that. But you know, we are well aware of the important outcomes that it can provide for those women. And I think it has reduced use of acute services because they've been able to access primary health care to address any needs and go through that appointment system with support, rather than leaving things till they're so bad that they need to turn up at A&E. And just as Nicky said, stepping away from that sort of spiral of chaos.
I think as well, in Leeds, we're really, really lucky in the fact we do a lot of really great partnership work. So we have the drug and alcohol service, sorry, my mind's gone blank.
A lot of healthcare. I mean, we do engage with a lot of healthcare services. There's a particular practice run by Bevan Healthcare here that supports a lot of the women that we work with, and also around the social justice team. It's part of the DWP to ensure that women are getting the benefits that they're entitled to. And all those things and mental health support, which are so key and so vitally important.
I think as well, we work really closely with the local police team in what was the managed area. So any concerns, we can call them at any point and they will come along to visits with us. So yeah, it works really well because all those services don't just do it where the women have to go to them. They're willing to do outreach as well, which is fantastic.
We also have a police officer, sex work liaison police officer, who supports us to support the women to report any crimes against them, and that is really helpful to the work that we do. So reasons to celebrate. So I think we have a lot of reasons to celebrate, and these are some of the quotes from women about their experience of Housing First. I remembered I'd been given this house. It was a nice feeling knowing in rehab that I had a nice place to come back to. I haven't stayed on script before because I never knew where I was going to be staying. I feel like I'm making my own choices now. And she's also exited sex work. I never had anywhere to care about before, but now I don't want to go to jail and risk losing my little house. So that's having had a history of being in prison and not now reoffended for 15 months. So they're all really important. And also from a professional that said client engagement had always been sporadic at best. But they feel this had improved once Housing First were involved. Do you want to add anything, Nicky?
I think the only other main quote from the lady that we've worked for 4.5 years is, she said, "You've saved my life 3 times," and literally we have. We've due to overdoses and been there for when our mental health has been really poor. So yeah, I think obviously, yeah, we definitely
doesn't
have.
get better than that, does it?
It doesn't.
So moving on to the challenges, which I sort of touched on earlier. So house scarcity. And we've said here, not always able to house in preferred location. Often it's not able to house, full stop. And that has increased over the the past few years, and it's got, I think it's to an all-time low of being a really big issue for us. So obviously one of the main principles for Housing First is that a woman can choose the location where she wants to be for the reasons that would make it best for her to be in that environment and in that place, whether it's network of friends or family support or whatever it is, or away from previous friends if that's what she chooses to do, if she wants to change, to make big changes in her life. And now we're just really, really struggling to find properties at all. And in fact, we've had 2 cases where we've had to always sort of flex a bit, and we've had to look to the private sector to find properties in the right locations for women. And we've worked with some really positive landlords who've been on board with what we're trying to do and have been very supportive. However, due to situation that we're in around inflation and the whole situation of the economic crisis, 2 of them have sadly had to let us know that they're preparing to sell those properties, and therefore that means that those women are we're going to have to work really hard to find them accommodation elsewhere, and that's a real shame, but unfortunately it is the reality of life as things stand at the moment. I think
on that note as well, rental prices have increased dramatically, especially the last 12 months, which again can put some properties out of reach for a lot of the women as well as private landlords that are cherry picking which tenants they want in. So yeah, it's definitely getting more and more difficult.
It is, yes, and just the lack of social housing altogether. I think it's a huge issue, and sometimes it's around managing the community in which they live. We've had situations where neighbours have found out that the woman who's living in the property is a sex worker, and they've been, almost spying on her from across the road, watching movements coming and going, reporting to the police that so and so came, but what, to a level that none of us would expect or have to put up with. And that again is down to stigma and discrimination around and lack of understanding around sex work, and then the tensions that can cause both within that neighbourhood and for the woman who's trying to live her life in that environment. I think that's always, that has been, and not so much at the moment, but it has been an issue that we've learned over time. So lots of conversations with communities to try and explain the situation, where we're coming from, the support that we offer, and we do that with landlords so that they recognise that actually there is a lot of intensive support that goes in. So hopefully we manage to mitigate some of those challenges, but nonetheless they are there. So lessons were learned. I think we have learned that it doesn't work for everyone straight away. Some women might need multiple attempts to stabilise and learn from what we're calling their mistakes or arising issues. Whether I put mistakes in inverted commas there, because often women who've been homeless or sofa surfing will have been doing that for a number of years. They'll have been relying on friends, on punters, on a whole range of people to ensure that they've got somewhere to stay for the night. And once they get a home, if they're put in a position where they're asked to accommodate someone, they find it really hard to say no, because they feel like that, people didn't say no to them, so they feel that they should say yes. However, that then can lead to issues of not having control over the property, the home's being taken over almost. It can lead to antisocial behaviour, neighbours and landlords complaining, and potential for cuckooing. So that's something that we do talk to women about as they start on their housing first journey. It's not easy to say no, particularly when you've relied on people saying yes to you. So it is something that we're very, very aware of. Location of the property has been an issue when we've not been able to house a woman in the area of her choice. And it's got to the point where she's agreed to go somewhere that isn't ideal. And we've had situations where we've had to then move women from that property to another because it hasn't been safe or the correct environment for her. There's also safeguarding issues, domestic abuse and safety. And as Nicky's alluded to earlier, because we can get really rapid lock changes, that's a really real positive. However, there have been times when actually staying in that property altogether isn't safe, and then that's caused other issues. And finding accommodation is not easy, and finding refuge accommodation can be really difficult for women who've got multiple complexities around them, because refuge isn't always the best environment for them either. And then there's the risk of compounding trauma and adversely affecting self-esteem if it's not working, because women will feel that it's their fault, that they've done something wrong. And so we're constantly battling and working around that also. So anything else you want to say, Nicky?
No, I think you've covered it.
Okay. So it fits really well with Basis because it matches with our values around harm reduction and being rights-based, which is the values of our organisation, and the fact that it's person-centred support. It's unconditional other than basic engagement, but specifically not conditional on stopping sex work, as I've already said. And the level of support is unrestricted in time. Obviously, that always has the caveat of depending on funding, but we have been very fortunate because we do have funders who do understand what we're doing and the achievements that we've made, that so far they have been very happy to continue to support us with this work. And finally, just to say thank you. You can read more about us on our website. It's there on the slide, which I'm sure you'll get afterwards, and you can follow us on social media. So thank you for your attention today. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to ask.
Thank you so much to Moya and Nicky. That was an unbelievable presentation, and I know I'm a little bit biased because I'm from Leeds, but genuinely, the Commonwealth WhatsApp group has just been full of messages saying how impressive your project is, really appreciating the values that are shining through in how you talk about the way that you support women through your Housing First for Women project. So thank you so much for sharing such invaluable insight with us, both the real positives, really obvious positives, but also some of the challenges and learning. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure that all the people in the audience are taking huge benefit from that learning. People can submit Q&As using the Q&A on your screen, but we've already got a few questions in, so I'll go through those over the next 10 minutes or so. So firstly, you've talked about the importance of being trauma informed, and clearly, you know, a lot of the women that you support have had significant impact of adverse childhood experiences and continued trauma into adulthood. And it's really clear that that's the approach that you take. How have you found interactions with other public services? Do they understand the importance of taking a trauma informed? Do they understand the impact of trauma, or have you had to kind of work with them to increase that understanding in their response?
We have over years had to work with them really closely to increase their understanding. I think we're at a point now where there's a lot of talk about being trauma informed, and it's almost like I fear that it could becoming one of those tick boxes that, we've done trauma-informed training, tick, let's carry on. And I think, it's constantly sort of bringing people back to, actually, if you're going to put someone through a really intensive assessment for something, and they're not even guaranteeing that they're going to get anything at the end of it, why are you asking all those in-depth questions? And you're doing it over the phone, and they're not even potentially having a worker with them to support them through that. And, we've worked with our local housing options to flex that so that they'll actually speak to the worker, and the worker can give them that details rather than put the woman through that again. It's that recognition that repeating traumatic experiences re-traumatizes and makes life even more difficult for that person. So I think things are improving, and certainly both within adult social care, within housing, within the housing department, within Leeds Council as it generally. I think there is a lot of understanding and health professionals that they need to do better, and there's a willingness to. They don't always get it right, but I think because there's a willingness to, it feels a bit like we're pushing on an open door at the moment.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think we're having similar discussions in Wales about the worry that, trauma-informed becomes a buzzword or a tick box. And actually, it's really important that we're truly delivering compassionate, trauma-informed, non-judgmental support to people, and that is across all public services, not just the project itself. And Alex has said in the chat, definitely echo the need for genuine trauma-informed and reflective work, focusing on the ethos, not just the phrase itself. During one accreditation process, someone summed up trauma-informed work as having empathy. And I think that's at the heart, isn't it? Empathy, compassion, and that deeper understanding informing the approach. We've had a couple of comments in the chat. So what is your experience of online sex work and the risks associated? Is this impacting on your work in any way that I guess might be different from the kind of physical sex work that people are involved in?
I mean, we've always worked with some women who have chosen to work online rather than in any other sphere. And I think it is around having those conversations about how to best keep yourself safe, and that's part of our harm reduction ethos. So whether that's working on street, whether it's working from your home, whether it's working from another venue or online, I think it's really important that women have access to that safety information so that they can make their own risk assessments and judgments as they go along. We have found we used to do what was called net reach, so we would reach out to women who were on online platforms such as Adult Work and Beaver Street, to give them information about us and our services, and that we could reach out to them, or they could come to us. We could have conversations with them online or on the phone. That became much more difficult with GDPR because we weren't allowed. We do have adverts on the side of those platforms, so that we're getting some information, but we can't directly contact women who are on those platforms. So from that perspective, it has made that level of work more difficult. And I think COVID made everything more difficult. Mm-hmm. And there'll be a lot of women who moved to working online who had not previously done so because of COVID, and not necessarily in that safety information and support around it. So it is something that we're very conscious of, and trying to think of ways, always outside the box, think of ways that we could work better in that sphere.
We also, we've got 3 saunas in Leeds, so we do outreach to them with the sexual health testing. The sexual health nurse comes out with us on that as well. So we get a really good response from them.
Thanks both. And that's really interesting because you mentioned earlier that women are often kind of part of the hidden homelessness group, so they're less visible. So where traditional Housing First projects might go out and look for people who are sleeping rough on the streets, actually in the case of women, you have to look in different places to engage. And how are some of the ways that you've managed to kind of find women and engage with them?
Well, we do evening outreach in Holbeck 3 nights a week. So that's to offer support to women who are sex working on street. They'll often they'll get onto our van and tell us that they're homeless, and we can then try and get them emergency accommodation for that night. We also give women cheap phones with a SIM card in, so that if they can't, often it's really difficult to get a response straight away from the emergency team. So we'll give them a phone and then pass that number on to emergency accommodation, and they can ring the woman directly in order to be able to house her for that night. And women build up trust and along that journey, so they may see us first as someone who will provide them with condoms and something to eat and a hot drink when they're out working. And the more the time they spend with us and they see us, we can invite them to come into our building, to our drop-in, and there's a whole range of support we can offer. So we build that up over time, and then we'll move along there. So often women will, and they speak to each other, they'll tell each other, get yourself to Basis, because they'll be able to help you with what have you. So yes, so it's not the sort of usual way of sort of going out and looking. We make sure that we're in the place where they can find us, really.
And that really emphasises the importance of that assertive outreach and pre-tenancy work. I think people often view Housing First as from the moment that people enter the tenancy onwards, but actually there's a huge amount of work that goes on beforehand, building those trusting relationships and getting to the point where someone wants to access that tenancy. We've had a question in from Oliver. Such a good presentation, thank you. The involvement with the police is really interesting, but did any of that change after Sarah Everett, and also the recent growth in cases of police contacting domestic abuse survivors for relationships that have been reported quite widely in the press? So has anything altered in terms of those relationships with the police or the trust that maybe survivors have?
Not that we've noticed, but I mean, we'd had, and I don't know how many people will know anything about the managed approach that we had in Leeds until last year, but that had been in place for the previous 5 or 6 years, and had been independently reviewed to show that actually there wasn't anything in the country that provides that level of safety and support for women who were sex working on street. Unfortunately, the political field changed, and I think because of COVID and the fact that it was closed for such a long time, the appetite to reopen it drained away, shall I say? I'll put it that way. So, but because we'd had that approach for so long and worked so closely with the police, and there is a dedicated police team within West Yorkshire Police. It's a very small team, but it is a dedicated police team who are there primarily to safeguard and support women. And although personnel have changed over time, they work really closely with us. They spend a lot of time with talking to workers and being engaged in meetings around particularly vulnerable or safeguarding issues that come up, that we haven't found that the trust in those particular officers has waned. However, I think outside of that very small police team, I think there was never, and probably still isn't, much trust in the wider police force. I think that's, would you agree, Nicky?
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks both, and thanks all for such a great question. So we've heard during your presentation, I think the depth of understanding that you have about the traumas that women have been through and continue to try and cope with in terms of their response to those traumas, their resulting mental health problems, addiction issues, homelessness. And I guess it feels to me that one thing that's been critical to the success of this project is that there's a specialist women's organisation that is running it. Would you agree with that? So, if there are commissioners, at this conference who are thinking about commissioning Housing First for Women projects, either for sex workers specifically or generally for women, what would your views be about the importance of specialist women's organisations leading those?
I think it's key to the success. I think having a specialist women's organisation that can provide that women-only environment and space and understanding is absolutely at the core and the heart of what we do. And I think it's so important for women who often from childhood have experienced abuse at the hands of men in their lives and continue to experience abuse at the hands of men who are coercive and controlling and being violent towards them. Sex workers experience a really high degree of violence towards them, both sexual and physical violence from men that sometimes that use their services, of others that are not using their services but are controlling them. So I think it's really, really important that women know they've got a safe space to come to, and they've got women providing that support that have that understanding. Thanks
very much, Moya. I'm worried that we've run over, but this session is just so fantastic. So if I may, just two last questions to get both of your reflections on. So what would your advice be to any specialist women's services in Wales who are thinking of embarking on Housing First? Would you advocate that this is a really positive model that can make a real difference to their clients? And would you have any specific advice for those specialist services who are thinking about Housing First for Women?
I would absolutely advocate anyone who is a specialist women's organisation to look into delivering a Housing First model. I think one of the key things is to keep the caseloads very low. Yeah. I think that is just so important in being able to deliver that level of intensive support. That the hope is, and our experience is, that as time goes on, the intensity of that support can change and lessen. However, it's so important, and certainly it's not just for the first 6 weeks, 6 months or whatever. It takes a long time when you're dealing with someone who has had such complexities in their lives for so many years, and to deal with all the issues that come up, which often do come to the surface once somebody is in a settled environment, because they've got more time to think and reflect about what's happened to them, and they need that support in order to be able to move on. We've had women now who are engaging in volunteering opportunities and training to do other things around hair and beauty therapy, for instance. But that does take a long time. So it's longevity of support and funding that goes along with that. Piecemeal funding really, really doesn't work. And it can, do more harm than good, I would say, because it can destabilise women who have developed a relationship with a member of staff. If that funding goes and that person has to go, then it can cause real harm. So I think they're the things that I would say are most important. What do you think, Nicky?
Absolutely. And I think we don't put any time limit on, I know a lot of people in other roles or with the funding, it's like 6 to 12 months or 12 to 18. We're lucky that we don't have to do that. on average, I would say you need at least 2 years to do it successfully and actually make a difference to that person's life. 2 years, I think, as Moya said, 12 months, you can just be dipping into the more intense stuff. So, yeah, I think that's got to be, when people are looking at funding, I would say minimum of 2 years.
Thanks very much, both. And final question, I promise, but there's a whole bunch of generic Housing First projects who are attending this conference who will be interested in knowing how they can be better informed about supporting women who may come through generic Housing First projects. So what would your advice be to generic projects about how they can kind of increase their understanding and improve their provision if they're supporting women through the system?
I think if you're supporting women, I think it's important that women have a choice about who supports them, so that if you're in a generic project, then you need to be able to offer a woman support worker to that woman. I think that there's all the stuff around the trauma response that some people, we have the sort of almost people who are deserving and those who are undeserving. So if you're a woman that, you know, is showing obvious signs of distress, then they will get a very different reaction from someone who maybe is showing anger as a response to the situation they're in. And often I would say that rightly so that they're angry, but I think it's having that understanding around that not all women present in the same way, and that, you know, whichever way they're presenting, it's valid for them, but we need to keep them safe and keep others safe. So there needs to be that understanding and how to do that, and how to de-escalate situations, and how to support women to, maybe, as you know, if they've had children removed, to build up those links, but recognizing that actually there could be reasons in their past why they've moved away from family. So it's going at their pace and following their needs and what they want, I think is really, really important, rather than thinking that you as the worker know best as to what will help and what will support them, because that's not always the case, and they know better than we do. The women that we support are some of the most resourceful women that I've ever met, and you know, they've survived in situations where I'm sure I wouldn't have been able to. So I have such an admiration for them, and I think we need to trust them to know what's best for them once we've given them that stability for them to really think about what that is.
I think as well, Homeless Link do quite a lot of forums in different locations, women-only ones, and also I think some training. So it would definitely be worth looking into that, joining some of the forums where best practice is shared for working with women. It's really good.
And we deliver training on working with sex workers. So if anybody's interested or anyone wants to come and visit us in Leeds, then please do let me know. We'd be happy to see you.
Fantastic. I might pop in next time I'm visiting the family. Thank you both. That was an absolutely fantastic session. Thank you so much for giving up your time, for sharing your expertise. It's been amazing to hear from you, Moya, as Chief Executive, but also Nicky, thank you so much for taking out time to give us that view really from the coalface. I know that attendees will have found that hugely, hugely valuable and taken away so much learning from that. So a huge thank you. Enjoy the rest of yours days, but thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us today.
You're very welcome, and thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you. So to everyone else, we will bring this session to a close now, but we hope to see you back for the next session, which is Housing First and the Concept of Graduation, which starts at 12:15. So I hope you found that session really useful and stimulating and took lots from it, and we hope to see you for the next session. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn.